go ahead and get started. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today to this webinar today, Creating Accessible Exhibitions for People with Blindness and Low Vision. Today's session is a part of an ongoing Accessibility in the Arts Learning Series presented by the Oklahoma Arts Council. My name is Erica Wilhite. I'm the Arts Learning and Communities Director. I'm also the Accessibility Coordinator for the agency. Please drop in the chat your name, your organization if you're representing an institution, or maybe your arts practice, and also the community that you're Zooming in from today. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you require closed captioning, you can enable that by going to the bottom of your Zoom screen, clicking More, and choosing CC, closed captioned. We are recording this session and we will send you a link afterwards. This session will also be posted on YouTube. So if you are not able to stay for the whole session or you want to share with your peers and your colleagues, that's a way to do that. Feel free to keep your videos on or off. We will facilitate a Q&A following the presentation. So you can unmute yourself and come in at that point, or drop your questions or your reflections, comments in the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll address them when the Q&A happens. And one more thing, please join us next week for another webinar. It's called The Careers in the Arts for People with Disabilities. This is a presentation by the National Endowment of the Arts for the Arts. The Director of Accessibility, Beth Bienview, will be presenting on a new toolkit for how to work with artists with disabilities and also for artists with disabilities. Also during this session, there will be a conversation with a few Oklahoma artists. So I'm actually now about to drop that Zoom registration in the chat so that so you can register for that. I'll also email a follow-up with that registration as well. Okay, let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today's speakers, Jack McMahan and Randall Barnes. Jack is the president of Crossing the Chasm, an accessibility management consulting firm where he specializes in helping municipal and private facility owners and managers evaluate, design, and manage effective accessibility resolutions. He recently retired as the Chief Innovation and Accessible Technology Officer from NewView, and he currently serves in an advisory capacity on the Oklahoma Arts Council Accessibility Committee here at the agency. Jack will present and then he'll hand the baton to Randall. Randall Barnes is the Installation Design Manager at the Oklahoma City Museum of Art. He's known for a design approach that melds artistic creativity with technical finesse. He is dedicated to ensuring art is accessible and captivating for all visitors. His commitment to creating immersive and engaging spaces both parallels and contributes to the Oklahoma City Museum of Art's commitment to presenting enriching visual arts experiences. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jack.
Thank you very much, Erica. Let me make sure that you're seeing my screen. Is that the title slide is on the screen?
We don't see it yet.
Mm-hmm. Just did this a moment ago. Okay.
And I remember it was the way that we were viewing it before that share screen button disappeared. Ah, there we go. Jack, I can see the first slide and the following slides in the left column. There we go. You're in presenter view now.
Okay, sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be joining you this morning and trying to share aspects of a story that Randall and I both participated in, which was a really exciting story. And the whole story itself started in April of last year. So we're looking at basically the year anniversary. What I would like to do this morning is I'd like to go through actually how the story began, or how the idea of having an accessible exhibit began, and then kind of walk you through the elements that were considered or had to be considered, and what the impact of some of the changes we made during the project with you this morning. So with that, let me get started. Um, the beginning of this project began with the director of curatorial in the customer experience last year, and she had seen or read about the impact of making some elements of an exhibit tactile, so that some people who particularly are blind or have low vision could actually experience the same exhibit that someone else might be able to if they were sighted. So she came to me saying she wasn't really sure how to do it, where to get the resources for it, and how effective it might be from an accessibility standpoint. So that's how the project actually began. Uh, I will also tell you that the first steps of building a plan, our original plan was, and this is pretty important stuff in terms of this order, and that is the first thing that we decided to do was really scope out the entire project, not just the tactile element of the project, but what the whole project might look like, and how tactile elements, how many tactile elements, how large the tactical elements and how they were displayed was really, really important to the rest of the design of the project. So it went beyond, almost immediately went beyond this notion that it was just going to be one element that needed to be added or that would make a comprehensive, accessible exhibit. The second thing that we worked on was who was going to be involved with this project. Who were the owners that were applicable here? And I'll show you that in a minute. And this is absolutely important for anybody that wants to make an accessible exhibit, because elements of accessibility, the rules of accessibility, the nature of the laws you're exposed to differ by the owner representation on the project. The third one was to define the intended audience experience. Again, how was the experience going to come through for people with different types of abilities? A person with hearing or low hearing, or deaf or low deaf, low hearing, are going to be experienced and exhibit very differently than a person who's blind. But in the area of accessibility, you can't isolate your exhibit to just one form of accessibility. It's only going to be tactile. So we wanted to define what that was and what the experience might be, and I'll go through that in just a moment. The accessibility that were required, even though I love accessibility and I'm passionate about the laws that are involved with accessibility, there's no way for me to go take this experience this morning and actually share with you the elements of all laws that were involved. Although I do have a worksheet at the end of my program, which we will not be looking at, but they are available on the slide deck. So if Erica would share this slide deck with you, you will have ample time to get my recommendations on checklists, laws that were involved, and a lot of other aspects of accessibility on elements, from my opinion. So tips and tricks that I'll share with you. The last one was reviewing the budget and getting buy-in in order to make the project work smoothly and comprehensively. The first step in defining the project is really to do a very comprehensive description. It's not just saying we're going to have Fighters for Freedom as an exhibit and it's going to be on April 15th or July 15th, I think was the date here. It is to make a very, very comprehensive plan, because there are going to be a lot of people involved with the project. And you'll see in terms of engaging a lot of the different components of the display, that they need to understand succinctly, clearly, and accurately what the scope of work was going to be. The applicable parties, these are the legal interests that I refer to. And this is really, really critical, because every one of your exhibits or exhibitions or performing venues is going to be slight based on whose representation needs to be considered. For example, every if you have a static display or a static exhibit, the static exhibit is showing up in a room or a hall. It could be outdoors, it could be in a park. But the question is, who owns the facility that the exhibit will occur in? In this case, the Oklahoma City Museum of Art, Museum of Art, owns their own facility. But most of the cases that the performance or the exhibit will take place in, so this box here, the light tan box, represents the building. Who owns the building? If the building is owned by a municipality, like a library, often is occurring in a municipal library. Is it going to be in a performance hall? Who owns the performance hall? Who owns the actual building where the activity is going to take place? The third one is, in this particular case, the ownership of the art had to be recognized. It was the Smithsonian's exhibit. It was on loan to the museum. And the Smithsonian, as many of you know, is very, very specific in terms of how they want their exhibit to be displayed and what components of accessibility that are required by the Smithsonian. Other owners or owner stakes are, for example, the grantors. If you're applying for a grant, there's going to be a contract related to that. So there are going to be very specific requirements that could impact the accessibility of this project, and certainly things like contracts. You may have a food service, for example, that is going to be provided on the opening day or the closing day or whatever it might be. Well, there's going to be a contract associated with the accessibility requirements of that unit as well. So understanding who all the stakeholders were. If you had the facility itself, they have a different ownership responsibility to their building or their architectural structure than someone who, like the program, might have. Even the program has its own responsibility, but uniquely, and this may be surprise, if you are the program director, program administrator, you are responsible for the entire program. And if the program includes getting into the room or getting into the program where it's going to be taking place, and which includes things like parking and access hours and doorways and restrooms, then if you don't own the facility, you may not be able to make the adjustments, the required adjustments to make the whole program accessible. Even though you might say, well, we don't own it, we can't control it, there's nothing we can do about it, there needs to be a disclaimer. The facility owners needs to be acted to actually modify the building or the access way to get into your program. And even if you can't do anything or they're not willing to do anything, there needs to be some type of a document which actually acknowledges that the facility owner was approached, and that there's some type of a written notice of what took place and whether or not the facility owner had the resources or had the inclination to make the facility accessible as well. Something like the Smithsonian, as I said, is very, very careful in terms of how their exhibit is displayed. So they've got exceptional standards. They're not laws, they're standards of accessibility, and they need to also be recognized. So there are a variety of stakeholders, and making the exhibit or the performance accessible needs to make sure that you've covered all of them and all of their interests and all of the legal elements of accessibility that are required by each. The number of accessibility laws, the number of legal entities, everybody from federal laws to state to local, like the Smithsonian, are very, very confusing. It's just overwhelming in terms of what laws do I need to follow. So I've written out here in terms of kind of like a pathway. So if you're a federal owner operator, so this exhibit is taking place, presented by the federal government, and it's in a federal government property. You can see here the listed of the number of laws that you're required to comply with. So Architectural Barriers Act, the Americans with Disabilities Section 504, 508 of the Rehab Act, and Oklahoma Electronic Information and Technology Act, and Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So you have a distinctly, in what I might say, onerous number of laws that you're required to complete or comply with. If you are a state, you have certainly different other elements, other laws that you're going to comply with. And then if you're a private owner or facility, you're only required to comply with Americans with Disabilities Act. But on the other hand, if you're complying with a grant like Oklahoma Arts Council or an NEA or any other grantor, you're required to conform to their laws or guidelines. So that could bring in things like Section 504, 508. If any of you have any digital content or a website, which all of you more than likely do, then you're also complying with Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So it gets very confusing. I won't go into the technical details, but make sure that you understand what laws or accessibility requirements you have. In this particular case, we had a private entity. It was a nonprofit company, private entity, but they still had requirements in several different areas. Section 508, WCAG, and the Americans with Disabilities Act all had to be satisfied. Instead of going through all laws, I'm going to go through a very abbreviated of what you have to know, and really it becomes the bell cow of every different element of this or any exhibit that you've got. The first principle is everybody's included, everybody's invited. So not only people with mobility, so often you see this term, it's wheelchair accessible. Well, there are all kinds of other disabilities that are not wheelchair only. It could be cane, crutches, various devices. It could be a walker, for example. And those all fall under the realm of mobility. But an accessible project also has to recognize the need of people with sensory disabilities, which we think of most often as blind or low vision, or deaf or low of hearing. There are a number of other sensory disabilities that are there that have to be recognized and designed into your project. And lastly, cognitive. So this is something I see often in terms of museums or exhibits, and that is it's got to be understandable. You have different types of cognitive disabilities like autism, like traumatic brain injury. So you need to make sure that your labels, for example, are not only easy to see for the blind or low vision, but they're also easy to understand. Complex sentence, complex paragraphs, unique words, acronyms need to be carefully reviewed for compliance with the cognitive portion of 508, 504, 508, or ADA. The second principle is that everybody needs to be able to be accommodated in the same setting, same environment, to every degree practical. So you can't have one section of the exhibit or one section of the performance that is accessible and another session for the people who are not disabled. So that is really, really essential. The third principle is, and this is probably the most important one, is people with disabilities have an equal opportunity to participate in and enjoy the benefits of programs, services, and activities. That the wording that is absolutely critical in this is opportunity to participate in. That means it could be hands-on. If this is a hands-on exhibit or storytelling, for example, they must be able to be in it. They must be able to be in it to the degree that everybody else is involved with it, and enjoy the benefits of is really remarkable. That usually gets overlooked by most people having to do something with disabilities. The benefit of may be sound, it might be texture, it might be movement, it might be listening. So those things need to be recognized to the degree that it is possible under any type of an exhibit or any other type of program. And then the next one is independent use wherever possible. And again, this one often gets overlooked. I had worked with the American Museum, the American Indian Museum several years ago, and they had an exhibit, for example, that was a children's exhibit where a child would reach in a box, if you will. It was elegantly situated, and they would have various tactile elements. They might have feathers, or they might have an animal, a replica of an animal, and the child would reach in and feel that, and from that get some type of an idea of what that exhibit might be. The problem was that there was no way for a person who was sighted or not, or that was blind or had low vision, or if there were an audible experience associated with it, could also participate. So independent use, somebody has to be able to do it on their own. That you can't expect someone to have a guide or an assist or an aide or friend to be actually perform the function themselves for the individual. Defining the intended user experience was something we also did carefully. The curator director, Rosie May, we sat down and we said, what are we trying to do? What is the experience someone intends to have? What do they intend to walk away with? And this list that I show here is very, very small relative to all the experiences that you expect the person or a visitor or participant in some cases to walk away with. And then what setting are we doing this in? How is that going to impact the performance? And lastly, how are we going to do it? So in this particular case, for example, it was pretty easy to say that this was primarily an educational, informational exhibit. It was going to take place indoors, and it was primarily going to be visual. But there are all types of other elements that anybody would want to be involved with, to feel welcomed, for example, and that is, and also to feel to be understood. And the way you provide your exhibition or your performance really enables a person to decide that you really do want them. Or if you fail to do all those things, if you fail to make an accessible website, you're sending the message that they're not understood and they're not necessarily welcomed. So defining the user experience is absolutely essential. Defining the budget. Most of you probably know how to do the budgeting for your particular unique element or exhibit. But what I will say is, again, bringing back in that very specific scope of work is the building block. Realizing, it's important to realize that your exhibit or your scope may change over time. In this particular case with the OKCMOA, it did change. When we found out, or when the museum found out that audio describers, a technical audio describer, was a lot more accurate, but a whole lot more expensive than just doing the exhibit or doing audio description or audio elements. Reading a label, for example, was a lot more expensive. And the same thing's true with tactile exhibits. They expected the element was going to be in the neighborhood of $2,000 or $3,000. I think when they ended up, they had to. It was going to be a lot more expensive, so they had to change the number of tactile exhibits that they're going to have in the exhibit based on cost available. And then the last one is bid and no bid. That was a really, really critical element here because, for example, they weren't planning on bidding. They weren't going to outsource any of the development of the exhibit. But then later, as the scope of work changed and a comprehensive accessible exhibit evolved, they had to actually bid out some functions of this exhibit. I think the last element is getting buy-in. This is really, really critical. I worked with the McKnight Performing Arts Center. I was on the accessibility consultant for this project. And the really critical element here is that they would have input and understanding from each one of the components of the organization. The commitment from the board was absolutely essential, but everybody else, the janitorial staff, the security staff, the marketing department, everybody had to know what was going to be done and what it would mean and how it would benefit the actual performance. But this is going to change over time, just like the budget, just like the scope of work. So what we did at McKnight was we had weekly meetings at the beginning, and then we spread those out to be monthly and then later quarterly meetings in terms of this entire work, this group of people who were going to be involved with some aspect of the performance. So buy-in and shared information as the project is developing, and then actually after the project has gotten some legs and has had some audience review is really essential. So what actually happened? First of all, there are several elements of accessibility in any project that could be or will be. Every project has these. It will have architectural variables, it will have programmatic variables, and it certainly will have communication variables. In this particular case, however, the museum decided that they were in pretty good shape, they felt, and in fact they are. The museum is an excellent architecturally accessible venue. And they also decided that their website and digital content was in great shape. So they really wanted to focus entirely on the programmatic development of the exhibit. Programmatic is simply the combination of experiences, programs, services, and activities. And it is the fundamental reason, your exhibit is the fundamental reason for your performance, fundamental reason that guests come. It's not because you've got a beautifully accessible restroom. People don't walk away saying, wow, what a great restroom that was. What they walk away with is what a great exhibit that was. So programmatic accessibility is the reason they come, and it's probably the most important area of accessibility in your venue. So here's what we did, and I think that Randall is going to be a little bit more elaborate with this. But first of all, we did detect a way of helping a visitor access the exhibit. The exhibit is in a specific room. It was on the second floor, but the accessibility begins at the edge of the building. So how people get through the door, how they get to the ticket station, how do they get to the elevator, how do they navigate from the elevator to the exhibit room is all part of the venue. So as Randall will show you actually photos of it, we actually created a pathway or a guide to people who would be using canes or another method of detecting, using a device to detect floor path or route of travel. And this was really pretty interesting because we had the idea of not only having a detectable strip on the floor to guide a person who's blind or having low vision, but we also created kind of an innovative staff at each station. In front of each piece of work, we had an extra piece of tape that you could detect that you're in a different position. And so then you could turn and face what you could see was the piece of work, but how would a person who's blind be able to actually know to turn and face the piece of work? And in this particular case, that was really critical because they used QR devices to trigger audio description. So a person who was blind, for example, could navigate using their cane along the access route, but then they were triggered, they were alerted to turn and face the piece of art, and hold up their phone, and then actually trigger the QR code so they would have their own private audio description of that piece of work, so that it was nailing two areas of accessibility, not only visual, but also audible. So that was a pretty innovative part of this project. Simplified wording on all of the labels, so that we could make sure we were including cognitive disabilities. The work included 2 custom professionally built and displayed. I might add, how do you, not only do you build a tactical element, but how do you display it so that it's easily used by a person who's going to use a tactile element, like a person who's blind? Well, you've got to make it so that they can feel the entire object, not just part of it. So we had a table built, specific table that was also wheelchair accessible. A person could actually slide up under that exhibit table and have enough reach range to be able to feel the object. But a person who is blind also uh, could reach and feel the entire object and know what the limits of that was. There was a trained door greeter, 2 of them actually, one at the front door of the building, who would understand the needs of people with disabilities, various disabilities. So they're able to greet them, either direct them to or lead them to the ticket booth, then the elevator, and into the room where the exhibit took place. There was 100% buy-in from the board. This was really, really exciting to see on this project, because the budget had to be expanded twice. The scope of work had to be expanded a couple of times. And so that was only made possible because we had total buy-in. There was an aggressive pre-event marketing campaign, and people specifically were addressed in that campaign of what was going to happen, what the accessibility venue was, and accessibility elements were, so that everyone could feel involved or included. And then lastly, there was a rehearsal before the event actually opened. I took a team of 5 people to the actual venue. These 5 people represented all forms of disabilities, mobility, sensory, and cognitive. And so we actually went through and tested or evaluated, worked with the staff to get information from a person with disability of what they were experiencing, as well as affirming that the museum was on the right track. So it was a wonderful, wonderful exhibit to participate with. So I also have, beyond this slide, I've got 5 different pages of tips and tricks that are just my opinions. Things like the utilization of exhibit checklists, what some of those checklists are. I've got 4 listed, and the scope of each one of those. So that's the end of my exhibit, and I think I'm going to hand it directly off to Randall.
Thanks, Jack.
I gotta go back up here. Sorry, Randall.
You're all good. I would say reach out to Jack. Jack is a great resource, and he also is a straight shooter, which is like something I really appreciated. Was when we had ideas, as like a creative person, I'm like typical to do, and he was very upfront about being like, yes on this, no on that, here's why, X and Z, sort of. So reach out to Jack. He's a great resource. Okay, here we go. Okay, all right. So embracing accessible design, embrace accessible design. Some of this for me is just, I guess, just like really sort of leaning into what we're doing. I'm not going to say I'm an expert in this. but yeah, so I just kind of lean in and I use these 4 words: embrace, engage, encourage, and empower, to sort of guide my experience with this. I wanted to embrace the accessibility, engage a community of people to learn how to design this way, how to design for people, what I should be thinking about when I'm designing an exhibition like this. And then I want that engagement to sort of encourage participation, and thus we sort of empower the audience to do all of this. So first off, I'd like to start by giving a shout out to the mentors that I've had that have paved the way for me to be in this position, as a way to show respect and preserve heritage and share knowledge. Suzanne Thomas, Romy Owens, Ernesto Sanchez, and Trent Lawson. Without these people, I don't feel like I'd be where I am, or the person that I am today. So I just would really like to say thank you to those people for being a part. All right, my name is Randall Barnes. I'm the installation design manager at Oklahoma City Museum of Art. I have worked in the museum field for 10 years. I started at Rose State College with an associate's degree. I went on to OSU to get my bachelor's in fine arts. And this is where I worked in my first year at an art museum, the OSU Museum of Art Postal Plaza Gallery. I was an Emerging Artist of the Year in 2015. I've been through the Leadership Arts Program by the State Arts Council, which I also recommend. I think that was 2016. I also went on to be president and vice president of Inclusion in Art and served on the board for 5 years. And that's a local nonprofit that works to get more racial and cultural diversity into Oklahoma's art scene. We developed a mentorship program, exhibitions, collaborative events, and things like that. This is my 9th year at the Oklahoma City Museum of Art, in my 2nd year as the exhibition designer. So that's a little bit about me. Jack, like we said, a great resource and sort of like a driver of this project as well. So at the Oklahoma City Museum of Art, we are committed to creating a culture of welcome in which all visitors feel safe, supported, and valued. We acknowledge that our visitors represent diverse backgrounds, including but not limited to gender identity and expression, race, national origin, sexual orientation, religion, disability, age, and socioeconomic status. We strive to meet the needs of our community and to remove any barriers that prevent individuals from visiting the museum and participating in our programs. So our mission is to enrich lives through the visual arts, and so that is our goal. So I'm going to talk about Fighters for Freedom, William H. Johnson, Picturing Justice, and how we made this exhibition and future exhibitions accessible to blind and low vision visitors. William H. Johnson, let me just talk about the exhibition a little bit. So Fighters for Freedom is a series from the mid-1940s as a tribute to Black activists, scientists, teachers, and performers, as well as international heads of state. Some of these fighters are Harriet Tubman, George Washington Carver, Marian Anderson, and Mahatma Gandhi. Many historical figures and some lesser known individuals. This exhibition is drawn entirely from a collection of 1,000 works by William H. Johnson, and they were given to the Smithsonian in 1967. William H. Johnson was born in South Carolina. I want to say at like the turn of the century, I think, maybe in 1906. When he's 17 in the 20s, he goes to the National Academy of Design in New York, and then moves to Paris in the 20s, where he's working with European moderns. And so he develops this realistic style and sort of develops into a modernist in France. And he gets married to a Danish woman, Holke Craik, which sort of informs his work. She's a tactile artist, and introduces him to Danish art, and they have this sort of exchange of ideas that sort of shows up in his work, especially in the work here. They come back to the 30s in come back to the US in the 30s as World War II is starting to build up. He's a teaching artist during the Harlem Renaissance, and this is his last body of work. So the 40s were like a tumultuous time for his life, and his studio burned down. He lost all his like art goods essentially and had to restart over. His wife passes away, and he sort of has this mental breakdown and is institutionalized and is in an institution until the 70s where he passes away. And he has over 1,000 works that are almost destroyed in the 1950s. And the organization that helped send him to Europe to sort of expand his art career actually preserved the work and donated to Smithsonian. So there's over 1,000 works by William H. Johnson in the Smithsonian's collection. So how do we engage in accessible design? And what does this mean? And so for me, it was just putting the needs and services at the forefront of the design, the curatorial, and the planning, much like Jack talked about, like are we simplifying language? Which way, how are people going to be able to access this? Sort of like, what could we be doing? What aren't we doing? And this is sort of like where we begin our conversation with the whole thing. So most of this is just conversation, I think. So most of my professional practice is community driven, and I like to collaborate, conversate, just be a part of the community and find out, what am I doing or not doing? What could we be doing? What are things that this community is looking for? Reaching out to organizations, people, to have these conversations. And that's sort of what we did with NewView and Jack. So I think we had like 7 or 8 meetings. At first it was Jack and Rosie, and then it was me, Jack, Rosie, and another guy, Doug Massey. We're talking about our ideas of how we think we're going to approach the exhibition, and but also sort of giving ideas back and forth. What they're telling us, well, think about this. Here's what you could be doing. Here's something we actually care about, or something that is sort of like maybe too much work. And so it's really being collaborative, reaching out to other organizations, getting differences of opinions, and sort of coming back together and doing what you can with what you have. A lot of this is doing what you can with what you have, I think. At least it was for us at our organization. And so in these partnerships, especially with NewView, so NewView is, I want to say they're the largest employer of blind, low vision people in Oklahoma. And they also have like a manufacturing part that a lot of people aren't aware of. So they have this, I guess, like factory warehouse. It's pretty huge, where they're creating and developing products that some of them are government contracts. Some of them are shower curtains, like parking blocks for airplanes, parking blocks for tanks, things like this. So there's like this manufacturing part that's going on there. There's 3D printing, there's CNC, there's all kinds of things going on at NewView. And so part of our partnership with them was touring their facility. So we go to their facility, and there's a lot of things that we're learning. We're talking with people. We're interrupting people's work first off. So like people are kind enough to stop and talk to us while they're in the middle of their shift. We're looking around. We're seeing there's these tactile strips on the ground. There's these raised lines. There's these bumped tactile mats on the ground. That maybe it's a tripping hazard, maybe it's like just a different texture. And so we're beginning to like take in this space and see how it's used by blind and low vision people, why it's used the way that it's used, and how we can incorporate some of these things into our exhibition. So in this part with the walking canes, we see this yellow line on the ground. These are the cane guides that Jack talked about earlier. And these are just so someone who uses a cane, they know, okay, I'm in this straight line. This can take me to where I need to go. And you'll know when the path turns, when there's something that maybe you need to stop, or something like that. In doing this, in our conversations, we also learn a lot of what we've been conversations that we've had when we talk to people about our blind, low vision accessibility is Braille. And in our conversations, and this might not be true for everyone, but in our conversations, Braille seemed sort of like fourth or fifth down our list of how a blind, low vision person might access information. I think in our research, we found that 10% or less than 10% of blind, low vision people use Braille. And so that was something that would have taken up more time and resources than we were sort of able to allocate. And we thought putting these resources into the QR codes, the tactile reproductions, these cane guides and other things would probably give us a better result, or a more accessible design that was also able to balance our work budget types of situations. As Jack talked about, as we like with the audio descriptions, as we needed to do this the right way, we found that there were we would add these additional costs. And so for this particular project, we had to make some decisions on which way to go. So our tactile reproductions, we're giving our community members the ability to access art and its context on various platforms. And we're really sort of trying to meet people where they're at. And so from those tours, we pick up a few ideas that we're going to go with. We're going to go with the QR codes, we're going to go with cane guides, and we're going to go with tactile reproductions. We already had been doing large print labels in our galleries. And these are nice. So say you can't, that the size of the font on the label is too blurry. Here we have the large print, which is nice if you want a large print, or if you just want something to step back and look at. I think today it's undervalued how much people just want a physical thing in their hand, especially sort of post-pandemic, when it's like everything's a QR code, don't touch that. People like stuff in their hands. And so we have the large print labels. So these tactile reproductions, or I guess we'll go with the QR codes and the cane guides. So these black lines that we have on the ground here, these are our cane guides. And so we took, as Jack was saying, we're seeing the cane guides, but in our galleries already, we sort of use these lines as a barrier to say, as a keep your distance from the artwork. So we don't want anyone touching the artwork. We usually like people an arm's reach, 30 inches or so back away from it. And we've had these lines in our galleries as a way to help our security people and our guests, just as a gallery courtesy. So we took the existing tape lines that we already had, and we upgraded the tape that we were using. So we actually used this thicker, it's maybe 1/8 of an inch, and it's slanted, and it's like a hard plastic. And this is so that when the cane, if you'll notice on this picture here, the cane, this little white ball on the end, that ball actually rolls, and it's rolling in the cane, and it'll feel the bump of the tape and the three-dimensionality of it. So we put this tape down. We've integrated this into our permanent collection in every exhibition going forward since this exhibition. And QR codes. So on our QR codes, we have audio descriptions of the work. So it describes the work. And then we also have audio labels. So you can scan the QR code, you can get a description of what the work looks like, and then you can get the label context all in audio format as well. I would say on this part, this is the part where you need to collaborate with your IT department. I think some of the stuff here is like your server's capacity for traffic, if you have a lot of scans, or we essentially had to make a web page for each QR code. And so that's 30 plus additional web pages. And so working with your IT department, maybe you'll find a way to either do that smoothly or some other routes, like apps or other things like that. And so the QR codes, this is also other ways for us to add context to the work. This becomes a way that we can engage blind low vision, but also engage our other audience. And so we can add additional context photos, things like that with QR codes. The tactile reproductions. So this is a quote from tactileimages.com, which is who we use to make our tactile works. And a tactile image harnesses the senses of touch, sound, and sometimes smell to help the blind and visually impaired community expand visual knowledge in a meaningful way. Now, these works, the ones we have, are touch only, but this company, they can put sensors into these so that when your hand goes over a place, it sort of activates the sensor, audio plays, and it tells you more about the context of that specific part of the work, as well as the whole work in general. They're really high tech and super helpful people. And so here you can see the sort of the stand, our tactile station that we built. It's wheelchair accessible. It it meets ADA requirements, things like this. 3D PhotoWorks. This is the company that we use, tactileimages.com. They make visual knowledge accessible for blind and visually impaired communities all over the world. Really great work. So they take, essentially what they do is they take your painting, your photo, your print, and they work with a sculptor, like a 3D sculptor. So this person's working in a CAD program, an AutoCAD program, and they are sculpting it the way, and then a CNC machine takes a block that's, I think, 3 or 4 inches thick, and it cuts down and cuts away the material to create the image. And so this is like a sort of reductive pattern, and it gives you really high detail. And then they put a really nice color finish on it that matches the painting. I don't really know how they do that, but it was pretty cool. So I'll show you some images. Here's the exhibition. I'll show you what it looks like, and we can kind of talk about what's going on here. So this is the entrance, and you can see arcane guides here. Each of our labels has a QR code and the tabs that Jack was talking about that would indicate that there is information there. And so here's the other side of it. You can see the tactile works here on this stand, and they're facing the works that they are recreating. And so the idea here is that you're in front of the work and you're still able to feel and interact with it in a way as if you're in front of the work traditionally. Into the next gallery. So this was in 2 galleries, and this is the second one. Here's our second tactile station. There were 2 works on each. So in the middle here, we have QR codes that have more audio description of each of the bits of information that are here. And these bits of information were just call outs to figures in the painting, and identified who some of these people are, what some of these things are, and why they're in there. Here's the end. I'll go ahead and wrap up mine and open it up for any questions. Yeah, that was a lot. I went kind of quick too, maybe too fast. I don't know. Any questions? Are there any in the chat?
Randall,
Yeah.
I did have a question. I'm not seeing anything in the chat yet, but feel free, by the way, everyone, to come off mute or just drop your question in the chat. So Randall, you mentioned the audio descriptions.
Yeah.
Do you happen to have an example of one of those that we could hear or see? Just
Uh,
curious about how it's different than just describing, or would you recommend a resource for us to go to see some of those examples?
I do not have one on me at the moment. I could get one. If anybody wants to email me, I can send it to them. I'll put my email in the chat. Um, that was more of our curatorial side handling those things. Uh,
Gotcha.
and so I'm really sort of like the hub of all the information. So I get curatorial, graphic design, uh, the build out exhibition side, and then the
Yeah.
all come together. So I don't
Well,
have.
maybe we can come up with an example, and I can share it in the post meeting email to them. But I just find it so interesting because it definitely is a very specific technique,
Yeah.
and an art form in itself, honestly. But so great. We do have a question in the comments. What heights do you use for the labels and QR codes?
So we put the tops of our labels are at 58 inches, and this core. So the center of our paintings, all our paintings are usually hung at a center point, which is at 60 inches. So the middle of the painting will be at 60 inches. We put the top of our label at 58 inches, and then the QR code underneath that. And then our labels vary from 4 inches in height to 12 inches in height. And as we've added dual language, they're bigger now. So they're around 4 feet. I guess the QR code would be about 4 feet high at the lowest.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I can also add a word here, and that is so often labels are designed for people who are sighted, but they have to remember low vision in terms of the contrast that exists between type and the back of the label itself. There are a lot of exhibits all over Oklahoma, various museums, where the contrast or size of type don't work for people who are sighted. So labeling is really, really an essential part of an exhibit.
I've got another question in the chat. Can either Randall or Jack talk a little bit more about didactic/text development with cognitive disabilities in mind? Is a new reading level benchmark? Is there a reading level benchmark to aim for, such as a third grade reading level?
I can't remember specifically what that is, but I think that it has to be in the 3rd to 5th grade reading level, not because number one, it has to be understandable. So simplified words, simplified duration of a sentence or paragraph, making sure that things like acronyms don't interrupt the flow of a piece of item. Things are bulletized, things are standard text. So those are all critical with those.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, I will be sending a recording of this webinar along with the slide decks available. Jack has some incredible worksheets, and we've got the contact information for both of our presenters. I'll be sending that in a few days. And just dropping again in the chat the registration for next week's webinar on April the 25th. This is a session with the National Endowment for the Arts. Beth Bienview will be presenting alongside with some Oklahoma artists, the Artists with Disabilities Toolkit. So please join us for that if you're able to. And I really appreciate all of you attending today's webinar. We'll see you next time, I hope. Thank you, everyone.